The Brandenburg Gate in Berlin was once as proud a landmark as the Arc de Triomphe, as busy as Admiralty Arch. Now it marks the dividing line between East and West, between the two parts of Berlin. And at its foot runs the symbol of that division, one of the bleakest, most brutal, and inhuman bits of masonry ever built, the Berlin Wall.
The Brandenburg Gate is one of the most iconic images of Germany's division. For 28 years, it stood in a desolate spot on no man's land. Life was vastly different in the west compared to just a few meters away in the east.
Our life, personally, didn't really change much. The problem, we had not enough space for building anymore. It was everything tight. We were on an aisle.
Well, even though West Berlin was the free part of Berlin, West Berlin was always considered to be the outpost, not only of West Germany, but of the whole Western world, which had to be defended.
We were in Berlin, in some way, prisoners.
It was a kind of isolated place, which had been, of course, the capital of Germany, but now a kind of decapitated head, but a head that had to be continually fed. They pumped millions of Deutschmarks into it just to keep people there.
We were relying on the Allies. That was our important hope, that the Allies would always try to keep Berlin going and to defend us.
Today, in the world of freedom, the proudest boast is, Ich bin ein Berliner.
Therefore, we were always very pleased when an Allied president or like the Queen came to Berlin. It was a sign of hope for us when living here all the years.
Where I lived was pretty close to the wall, so I could see it. So it was Leipziger Straße, which is running up to Potsdamer Platz now, and you could see it from, you could see the Springer Hochhaus, for instance. So you had the high-rise building from the east, and then if you couldn't see the wall, at least you knew there it is.
The West was full of glitz and consumer consumption and shops and neon and so on. The East German side was much more grey and so on. There wasn't any private enterprise, there wasn't any advertising.
It was a complete time warp. I mean, once you left Friedrichstraße station in East Berlin, you immediately felt as if you were being followed, which I think you probably were.
Very grey, reassuringly grey and depressingly grey. There was no paint on any houses. As a child, I didn't even know one could paint these houses. There are these cliches about what people in the East didn't get and what they wanted to have most, like chocolate and bananas and Coca-Cola. Bananas were not always to be got, but of course we had them. And we had our own green brand of oranges from Cuba, I think, and we did have chocolate, some sort of chocolate, and Pepsi Cola instead of Coke. So this wasn't the big problem.
We sent parcels to my husband's grandmother and his aunt and to other family members. And you knew that there was a lack even of needles for sewing. You knew very well in the West what they needed.
It's still one of the strangest trips our times afford, to go back and forth for a while between West and East Berlin. Political tourism. The Guardian had this lovely thing. First of all, it was letting its literary editor roam around Eastern Europe, simply because he happened to be a bloke who was interested in politics as well as literature.
We tried basically to give a sort of flavour of life. We spent a lot of time talking to sort of party intellectuals and people who were in the Writers' Union. It was kind of detective story reporting. You know, you had to look beneath the surface. You had to talk to people who sort of knew what was really going on in the party, because there was no public sources for that information. There was nothing in the newspapers or in the radio.
And we were all left-ish people, and all of a generation where there was still some vague thought, well, maybe, you know, maybe something could be done with the kind of socialist kernel of communism, and it would involve something different from sort of compromised social democracy, which was the best whack you got in the West, this sort of thing.
There was total absence of existential fears in the GDR, materially. Money as an issue practically was totally unimportant.
For instance, kindergarten and nursery schools were just for granted, were basically free of charge. The rent was so low, ridiculously low. Public transport, travel, no problem. Basic food, no problem. So you could lead a pretty carefree life. And as a young person, if you didn't expect too much, for instance, fancy shoes all the time or a TV set, I think it was pretty easy to lead a good life.
There was equal pay for equal work. And that was the major reason why about more than 90% of women were in work.
Part of it is because we were such a police state, it felt pretty safe. So the whole thing, you knew whatever happened, they had an eye on you, for better or worse.
We had compulsory military service, and in my personal case, it meant that I had to go to the borderline between East and West Germany. You had your Kalashnikov with you, so both patrols were armed. You just walked up and down the stretch of land you were meant to be. Days were quiet and boring, but you never knew whether or not it would hold, because you never knew whether today perhaps would be the day when something might happen. And this kind of uncertainty was the source of insecurity.
Paradoxically, there was a feeling of now the regime, the government, the party will relax. They've sealed the country. They don't have to worry about immigration in this major way, and they can now afford to relax. Well, that didn't happen.